Welcome to What's Off, the podcast where we shine the spotlight on off-Broadway innovation. Each episode features interviews with trailblazing artists, administrators, service providers, and other theater workers in the off and off-Broadway community. I'm your host, Nikki Maggio. My pronouns are N, they, and them. I'm trans, and some would call me plus size, but I like to say I'm plus fabulous.
And I'm your other host, Ashley J. Hicks, aka Ash. I'm a Black woman with albinism who identifies as visually disabled. The clip at the beginning of this episode was of our guest, Lynnette Taylor, who didn't realize something was off until she was able to share a powerful theater experience with her mom through American Sign Language. I recently sat down with Lynnette to discuss her experience as an ASL interpreter, as well as her incredible personal account of the 504 sit-in.
For those of you unfamiliar with this historical event, the 504 sit-in was a disability rights protest that began on April 5th, 1977 in San Francisco, and it lasted for 26 days. Lynnette will talk about how she became involved with the protest and how the experience continues to impact her work as an ASL interpreter for theater. She talks about her collaborative work with DASLs, and if you haven't heard that term before, DASL, D-A-S-L, stands for Director of Artistic Sign Language. Lynnette also mentioned several other leading disability rights advocates, including Judy Heumann. Judy unfortunately passed away after the recording of this interview. We are honored to dedicate this episode to Judy. So Ashley, is there anything else you'd like us to know about Lynnette before we begin?
Well, Lynnette is one of the leading theatrical ASL interpreters working today. She has interpreted over 100 Broadway and off-Broadway shows, as well as behind the scenes for film and TV. She is also a co-founder and co-instructor for the National Interpreting for the Theater Seminar, and she's currently writing a book on interpreting for the theater with co-authors Stphanie Feyne and Candace Brecker-Penn.
Let's do it. It's time to turn the spotlight on Lynnette. Be sure to stick around for a post-interview discussion with Ashley and myself. Enjoy.
Lynnette Taylor, welcome, and thank you for being here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for asking me, and I hope I have something worthwhile to contribute today.
I am so excited for everyone to hear this story about your experience with the 504 sit-in. So to start off, can you start by sharing how you found out about the sit-in and how you became involved?
Wow, origin stories are very hard. Where do you start the origins, right? I think I have to give a little background before I moved to San Francisco in 1976. So that got me to 504. But just before that, I was raised in Kentucky by a deaf mother, single mother. And so I'm a CODA, and sign language is my first language. It's my home language. It's my heart language. And I grew up in a very robust deaf community, very, very collective-oriented. Decisions were group made. My mother was a teacher at an art school, so I loved the arts. And I went to art school in San Francisco. I got a scholarship for the Academy of Art. At that time, 1976, there was no easy way to communicate deaf to hearing. And when I went to college, what I didn't realize, and no one told me, is that I would be separated from a deaf community, that I would be separated from my language, that I would be in an all-hearing environment. So I get there, and I go, okay, well, I got to find my people. Well, but I'm no longer part of this community. Now I have to come into a community and have something to offer. What do I have to offer? Well, I know sign language. I can kind of interpret. I grew up kind of interpreting. There were not many professional interpreters at that time. This was a nascent field. So I looked for the deaf agencies. I started, going around, how do I find the deaf community, and what do I have to offer the deaf community that they would invite me in? I'm there in 1976. I have to call my mother. To call my mother, I have to go to a deaf agency where there's a TTY. We had no easy access, right? This is pre-tech. This is pre-FaceTime, pre-text, et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, so I'm in the deaf agency, and there's a call that comes through, and the man who was running the agency, Eddie Origi, who's also deaf, who came into the building on and off, said they called looking for an interpreter to come down to a demonstration at the Health Education and Welfare Building in San Francisco. And he said, oh, well, guess what? I have an interpreter here right now, and I'll just pass the phone over. So they passed the phone over, and Scott Lube-King, who was making the call, said, listen, we're in the middle of a demonstration. The interpreter who's here has to leave. Could you come down and interpret? And I go, well, what kind of demonstration? Uh-huh. And he goes, it's a civil rights demonstration for disabled people. Civil rights for disabled people, just hearing that phrase was a reset on my whole life. In that instant, everything about my past, I understood in a completely different way. I understood that all of those moments when I couldn't share spaces with my mother wasn't because she was deaf, which was always what we go, oh, well, you're deaf, you can't go to this. Oh, you're deaf, you can't go see my high school play. Oh, you're deaf, we can't go to the movies together. That was just the given. It's a personal issue. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden that framed it as a systems social issue. I went, oh my God. And I went, yes, I'll be there. Of course I'll be there. So I went.
Wow. So it was almost as if this found you. You didn't go searching for it. It kind of, I don't want to simplify it by saying it fell into your lap, but it found you.
It was a karmic moment.
Wow.
I was
so
meant
cool.
to be. I mean, if you want to really, I don't think that there's any other way. It's sort of recognize, I think the universe sends blessings and messages all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's, if you can read the message, then right? And so the message came, you're here for this reason. This is why you're here. And that was what yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, this is a good transition into my next question. What was the day-to-day like for you, or when you first got there? What was that experience like?
Unbelievable, transformative. It was a moment where you recognize that coming together in a protest is generative, and it was all about the thinking in the building and the process in the building and the collective work in the building was all about being generative. You started to realize on a day-to-day basis that minds and bodies travel through space in different ways, and that we limit our thinking about what the universe can be by being constrained to one definition of moving through space, time, and the mind, right? And that's what this coming together it was like, taking acid. Oh my God. The possibilities were, were just endless, infinite. So I get there, they say maybe 2 hours. We're out there demonstrating. Judy Heumann rolls over and she pulls my arm and she says, come here. And I lean down and she says, we're going in the building. We're going to take over the building.
Oh, wow.
Can you come in? Because we don't have an interpreter. And I went, no classes tomorrow. Got nothing better to do. Sure, I'm coming in. We thought it'd be a day. It ended up being 26 days. And it's the longest occupied sit-in in history. And it was done by disabled people. And the one that was successful and changed the world, which none of us in the building at the time understood, that it would extend that far.
Are there any moments that are memorable for you of those days? Like it went from you thinking that, we're going to be here maybe a day, and it extended that long.
Oh, all of it. It was interpreting 24/7. We rarely slept. There were two of us, Jadine Murello and myself, who were the primary. We couldn't leave the building. Once you occupied the building, if you left, the guard would not let you back in. There were provisions. I mean, see, this was the creative part about a disability takeover. Well, we have to have attendants come in. Well, we have to have X come in. So they started to bend the rules for letting people come in. And because we could, so many of us could sign, we would stand out in front of the glass doors and sign across and tell people what to bring. We need this, we need that. And so the next set of attendants who would come in would bring toothpaste, bring this, bring that, et cetera. I had life-changing relationships there that, we're still in touch. Hale Zukas, who just passed away, was one of the main leaders in the building, and he communicated with the communication board, and had his PhD in mathematics. Brilliant. And because I was in college and not taking classes, he helped tutor me in math, and just kept on the board. He goes, "You don't know this!" Exclamation. I go, "No, Hale, I never learned that." He'd go, "Where did you go to school?" And I go, I love Kentucky, but Kentucky? And then he'd laugh, and he'd shake his head, and he'd go, "Let's start over." And anyway, so Olin Fortney, Dale Dahl, and Steve McClellan were the three deaf people who stayed the whole time in the building. Mm-hmm. Dale Dahl was a paraplegic who was also very active in grassroots community building. Mm-hmm. And Olin was the one who dragged me in music. I mean, he loved music, and he really loved the punk scene. So he would say, "Lynnette, come on. After we left the building, come on. I gotta go. Yeah, you have to interpret this for me. There were bomb scares. There was Glide Memorial. There were dog searches. There were so many conversations about how we were going to make this space work. We set up a mini city. I mean, where were people going to have sex? People had relationships. Somebody set up a tent in the hallway, charging 25 cents an hour. Oh, wow. So you have a little privacy. I mean, and the other thing that was so fascinating, I mean, I was so out of my element. I was 18. I thought you got off the bus and you would be in the city. I was living in an SRO in the Tenderloin. I was so unworldly and provincial. These people were brilliant. They were cultured. They were from the world. They all had PhDs, masters. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, there's a whole world out here that I had no idea existed, and they showed me that it existed. The organizers were all women: Mary Lou Breslin, Kitty Cohn, Judy Heumann, and for this time, I mean, we were NOW was just getting established. You had this backdrop of feminist conversations going on, and to see women in such power and facing congressional, and fighting, not bowing down, fighting. Judy Heumann, what are you crying about? What are you shaking your head about? You don't understand where we're coming from. Don't pretend to, and just calling it. No dancing around the conversation. Mm-hmm. This is what's real. This is what we need. We're staying until we get it. Kitty Cohn is the organizer. She was the one who really brought in everybody, brought in the Black Panthers, Glide Church. There were so many other, the automotive, IAM, the automotive machinists union. She was a great strategist. She was working as an editor for the Black Panthers in Berkeley at the time. And Brad Lomax, who was also in the building, who he was in the building. He was of the Black Panthers. So they reached out to ask for support. Black Panthers organized ways to bring in food. Glide Church organized ways to bring in food. It was, I think we were all just, Brett, I mean, we were incredulous. The idea that we could be forming coalitions across so many sectors of life, and also just in awe that we had support from the Black Panthers. We were all starstruck. Oh my gosh! I mean, everybody was like, oh, "Black Panthers, really supporting us?" I mean, it was really it was an honor, and a moment of recognizing solidarity, that if we don't do this together, none of us are going to make it. But Brad later, I mean, if you look online, he wrote an interesting article about his experience in the building, and then talked about that there wasn't enough representation and the racism that was still there. I mean, I think, of course, Avenue Q says it. Everybody a little bit racist, right? So we all have our work to do, and even though we're striving to do better, we still have we still create harm, and that harm has to be looked at and then navigated, so it doesn't perpetuate.
Right. I want to go back because you mentioned this in some of the memorable moments, and in our research, we heard about this unused elevator that became a favorite spot for intimate encounters. But you also mentioned there was a tent.
The elevator shaft was for the VIPs.
Oh, there was a hierarchy.
Just saying. Yeah, there was. I mean, it was really, and it's funny how hierarchy exists or it manifests even within 26 days. People sort of understood, oh, yeah, that's for the big makas over there. So we're going to make our 25-cent tent.
Oh, wow.
The other thing about living together for 26 days is you get to know each other pretty intimately. We all stank. I think you see that in the literature. We had no showers. Finally, they brought in, a way for us to clean. There wasn't a lot of privacy, so you did get to know each other's bodies in very ways that were not typical. So you also got to know ways that, oh gosh, I never thought about having sex that way. That looks interesting. It opened up every possibility. That's what I'm talking about. There's something about this idea of boundaries yet stripping away, opening up intimacy to include all kinds of ways of being intimate. That is, it's very powerful. Anyway, okay. I don't think you want me getting more graphic. No.
Well, I think what you just said speaks to the bonding that happened, over the course of the 26 days, just by nature of you all being in the same space and occupying the same space, which that is a great result of this sit-in, is that the bonding that took place. And of course you're going to get closer because you're all stuck in one location. So that definitely makes sense.
Which is what the world should be.
You'd think.
No, right? The world should be that 26-day sit-in because that's what you learn. And that's what non-disabled people learned every day when they came into the building. At first, it was just sheer hostility.
Wow.
And this ugh, look at these bodies. Ugh, look at these people. The disdain was just dripping. And we were sitting on their desks. We were under their desks. We were in California's office. We took it over. That's where the food was served. All of a sudden, their comfort zone is getting challenged. And they're having to deal with, look at, and reckon with architectural barriers, communication barriers, systems that were not working, that were literally designed to exclude and not include. And now it's in their face. It's not at a remove. And over the course of a week and 2 weeks, you start seeing the change in attitude. You start seeing this, oh, I never thought about the fact that you could fall down the stairs because there's nothing there to mark the fact that a stair is about to begin for someone blind. Or the fact that, oh, you need an interpreter, of course. Oh, I can't just yell loudly at you and you'll suddenly hear me. All of a sudden, all those little moments of oh, I have to do something a little differently, they're adapting. They're shifting, right? So think about what would happen if we weren't living in a society that is so segregated. Those natural interactions would just lead us to a different place.
So what were your takeaways from this experience? How did it impact your work as an interpreter?
I left art school. I realized, I guess for me, it was that moment of what is it that I really have to offer humanity? And and this is kind of sad, and I think it might have been a mistaken notion. The idea that for me to pursue my art would be selfish. And I think that was probably, you can pursue your art and it not be selfish. It can be very generative as well, just like the sit-in. I don't think I knew how to balance that yet at that time. And so I left art school and I started interpreting. And interpreting, oh my gosh. I so grateful for that opportunity and path. I would never have met as many people as I've met, brilliant, brilliant beings in my life, and learned so much. It is what has taught me.
So kind of widening the scope a little bit, in what ways do you think this event shifted the landscape of disability justice efforts?
I think it moved it from, as Kitty Cohn identified, it moved it from this problem is my problem to this is a civil rights issue. This is a societal issue. And it's a rights-based issue, and rights can't be parsed out. Rights are here for everyone. And it also challenged the idea of who's deciding what these rights are defined as, what these rights look like, what these rights live like, and where they're housed. And I think that's those are issues that we're still dealing with, because it's still these decisions are still being made not from community-driven conversations, or they're really still being made by those in power. And equal is getting defined as same. And when you define equal as same, then you have to go, well, what are you comparing yourself to?
Right.
And you're comparing yourself to the white, straight male paradigm, which is something I never want to. I have no aspiration of becoming, excuse me, I don't mean to insult any white straight males out there, but it wasn't, that's not my aspiration.
Right.
So then if you're offering me access that looks like, or equality that looks like becoming another, the dominant other in order to be equal, well, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
And it's just perpetuating the same old harm. You're just inversing a power. The problem is the definition of what the power is, right? And what that's getting defined as.
So how did theater jump back into your journey and, bringing interpretive theater? How did that come about for you?
I saw National Theater for the Deaf for the first time when I was probably around 13 years old. There was a bus load from the Kentucky School for the Deaf that went to see National Theater for the Deaf. My mother and I went. A couple of things happened. It's sort of like the civil rights moment with Scott Luking. This moment also reset my whole understanding of my language, American Sign Language, and art, the power of art. It was the first time that I could share a theater experience with my mother, right? So think about that. That integration happened from the other side, not from the hearing world, but from the deaf world. The deaf world invited everybody in. And so for the first time, I'm seeing theater with my mother in the language that I love and treasure. My mother was a poet too. She's just a beautiful, beautiful, she's a beautiful signer. At any rate, I saw Bernard Bragg perform. And it was William Blake's Tiger, Tiger. And in that moment, for the first time, I understood that American Sign Language was a language that could express art. There were so many attitudes about what sign language was. Within the deaf community, it was always a treasured language. It was the language. I mean, you would see people in the deaf community. I would be deaf for the language because that was the treasure. Everyone loved it. But the outside messaging on sign language was that it was an impoverished language, that it was broken English, that it was not capable of expressing scientific thought, abstract artistic thought, that it, these assumptions, wrong assumptions about the language, paucity of the language, which, as we know, is not true.
Right.
But those attitudes and feelings were prevalent in the community. It's a form of audism, linguicism, that then creates a layer of shame. So there was this moment there for me, and no one knew that. I mean, yes, the research had begun on sign language being a legitimate language, et cetera. But the community had not embraced that idea yet. It was still in the ivory tower. And there was actually some incredulity. Is it really a language? You guys are just making this up. You just go over there trying to get a job, So seeing him on the stage and National Theater for the Deaf awoke in me an understanding and a pride in my language. And my mother and I shared that moment together, which is just like, whoa, yeah.
Oh, wow. That is so beautiful. I love that. And to be able to experience that with your mom, it seems like once again, it found you. It wasn't something that you were, actively looking for.
Karma.
Yes, I love that. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk to you about your process today and the work that you do today with Dazzles. And if you could share what Dazzles are and how you collaborate with them.
Sure. I mean, sticking with my mother, this seems to be a maternal thing.
I love it.
My mother was my first Dazzle. And this is before we, officially defined dazzling. It was sort of interpreting for the theater came out of natural interactions. Deaf friends. I was in San Francisco at the time. You had a lot of artists there, a lot of deaf artists there who were involved in UC Celebration of Deaf Arts, who were involved in Deaf Media's filming of Rainbow's End, which was a Deaf Sesame Street version, right? Super Sign. So there was a lot of desire to see art and deaf people going, come on, let's go to the theater. Let's and we would sit together and interpret. No standing in front of the stage, nothing formal, and so it was sort of a mutual co-construction of meaning. Like I wouldn't know what the hell that meant, and I'd finger spell it, and they go, "Oh yeah," and they'd sign it to me. Oh yeah, that's how you express that. That's good. So it was very much a mutual conversation about what interpreting looks like, how the process of translation was very collaborative. Going back to My Third Eye, a National Theater for the Deaf, and Bernard Bragg and Tiger Burning Bright. It was the first time that my mother and I could work from frozen text together, right? So in the kitchen every night, I'd be signing over and over, Tiger Burning Bright, and she would be making corrections. No, that's the wrong inflection. No, it was this translation. And so for the first time, we were sharing literature in our language together, right? In ASL, not in English, not in written English. So this was, it was very formative. When we began interpreting theater, we drew from all of those natural interactions, right? Working with Dazzles. So let's create meaning together. What's clear, what's not clear, what needs to be made explicit, when do we need to focus to the stage, what is too performative, what performative information is necessary. And so that work with the Dazzles, and I must say, hands-on has been the one who has really, really supported this endeavor. And Tomasetti is actually one of the best Dazzles I've worked with over the years, other than my mother, of course. It's a beautiful exchange between cultures, languages, and forms. What makes sign language interpreting different is that, than other translation processes, is that it's visual and performative.
Right.
So we have to then honor the visual-to-visual agreements that are happening on stage and in our translation,
right,
as well as the performative and expressive. If our expressions aren't matching the expressions on the stage, then there's a little bit of a disconnect. But we also have to adhere to the principles of the language, right?
You mentioned hands-on, which you do a lot of work with as well, and our Art New York community is familiar with them. How did that relationship form?
I moved to New York in 1987. I heard about this organization, Hands-On. I was interpreting in San Francisco just prior to that. The first interpreted show we did there was Children of a Lesser God with the National Touring Company. And that was the impetus for all of this, actually. To formally begin interpreting theater, deaf community wanted to see the deaf stars on stage. And of course, this is a story about their community. So ACT out of San Francisco, American Conservatory Theater, arranged the first interpreted show there, and the process was beautiful. They did it just like we do now, but they auditioned. They brought in deaf artists to audition and screen the interpreters. I was chosen. I was not first choice. I was second choice. I will just admit that right now. But I got to do it anyway. The process was brilliant. It was very community involved, deaf community involved, but the product was odd. They built two platforms on either side of the proscenium and placed one interpreter on one side who was a male, and he was going to interpret all the male lines. Me on the other side, and I was going to interpret all the female lines, except when they were signing on the stage, and then we would focus to the stage. Well, I mean, think about that tennis racket eye gaze. Right, exactly. There's no coherence in the visual conversation. So process was fabulous. Product, we didn't know what this looked like yet, right? Hands-on had been doing a lot more here with DTW, Dance Theater Workshop. They had already begun. So when I moved here in 1987, I auditioned for Hands-On. I did... George Benson's On Broadway. I think that was my audition piece. I used the song, right? And I just kept thinking, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, right? They screamed my work. They liked my work. And then clearly, because they asked me back.
They liked you.
Yeah, I get it. And I did Shakespeare in the Park.
Oh, wow.
One of the Henrys. I don't remember which one, but I think that was my first hands-on, and a long relationship now, many, many years with Hands-On, Beth Prever, Candace Brecker-Penn, and now Dylan Kyle, yeah.
Wow. So what kind of work do you contribute now, currently?
I interpreted a lot of the shows. I do whatever is needed to be done. I'm the shoulder, I'm the ear. Work to get workshops together. We need a lot more training. There aren't a lot of opportunities for training. Like, I think in the past it was much easier because we didn't have, it's interesting, this propulsion for demand for interpreters in the theater has pushed us to accelerate in a way that we weren't ready for. That's on us. We should have been ready for this, right? We should have been extensively doing trainings, but we didn't. And so now we're finding ourselves in a crux a bit, having to train people very quickly to get up to speed. And what I mean by train is we came from a deaf-centric place, and then it has sort of moved more market-centric. And this is now what I'm seeing as the trend. It's becoming a little bit more transactional. And there's a real deep ethos and belief. This is a service. This is not a business. This is not a gig where you're going to make a lot of money. This is a job you do because you believe in the power of art to change lives. And you believe that this hub where people gather is political real estate that needs to be capitalized, which means bring all bodies together to see all stories. And then if that happens, we have the potential to change the world.
Yeah. I think one of the few upsides of the pandemic was that when we were all stuck in our homes and having access to theater in a way that we hadn't before, one of my hopes was that, oh, wow, we have these services that, there are performances that are being interpreted and captioned and, audio description and all of that. And my fear was that once, obviously we're still in the pandemic, but one of my fears was that all of that work would be forgotten about, and that we would go back to doing what we did before in terms of not everyone having access to theater. And I think one of the results of what you were just saying is that the demand is so high, but the training and the representation and other challenges, they haven't. It's almost as if it's become like a commodity, and it's like, wait a minute, this is something that should have been around way before the pandemic, and we're glad you're paying attention to it, but there needs to be a little bit more intentionality and more conversation around how do we supply the demand for these these service workers who are providing this access to the disabled community. And you spoke a little bit about it in your last answer with some of the challenges with training. Are there any other challenges currently that you have experienced or that you've noticed in terms of with interpreting theater?
Well, I think you hit a lot of the points. Thank you. I think that's, no, it's true. I think that we're in a funny place. I think we're in a funny place. Look, historically, we've been segregated. Historically, we're racist. The field of interpreting is primarily white, and that's on us. That's totally on us. We're trying to repair harms that are historic harms that have been going on for centuries in a very short span of time. That's fine. I mean, yeah, let's turn it up. Let's do it. We can't lose ground, though. I mean, and my concern is we're moving without deep listening. And we need places to come together to have deep listening, because this needs to be community driven. Otherwise, it becomes like you said, a commodity. It becomes virtue signaling. It becomes the checkbox on the access. The theater looks good, but you're not really providing the community what it needs. And you're also, I would say, what I'm experiencing on the service end as an interpreter is people making decisions about my work for me who have nothing to do with the field of deafness or interpreting, but they're woke. So they're going to tell me all about how I should be doing my work. And you're kind of going, whoa, this is exactly what we don't need to repeat. We don't need to be repeating. It's not an act of benevolence. It's a right. And don't start calling me an access worker. Did you ask me what my job is? Why am I'm a sign language interpreter. And then you have to go, why are you needing to change the language that is my profession? Are you uncomfortable? Or do you need to own it? Is this a form of appropriation? Oh, everybody does the same thing. Well, that's a little bit demeaning. No, you can respect all the differences in what we do, but it doesn't mean that you have to scale us down to all being the same.
Exactly.
And that's what happens. Disabled people are the same. Black people are all the same. Y'all all the same, all the same, all the same, because your IQ can only digest 0.02 difference. I mean, it's bad. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yes, I agree with you completely.
So the dilemma is, I guess this is my point. The dilemma is, if you see this as not a political endeavor, then we're going to be in trouble. This is a political act. Interpreting for the theater is a political act. Sharing this space is a political act. And we need to be in this conversation about what politics are being made. It's not about money.
Right.
I mean, we have economic justice that needs to be addressed. Yes, I'm not saying we do this for free. There has to be support, but there also has to be a shared ethos and philosophy about the approach to work.
Yes.
That's what gets lost in the transactional, market-centric model of just providing services.
There needs to be conversation around how do we make this work? And you mentioned earlier of how do we pay people to do the work that they do? And if it's not included in the budget, if it's not mindfully thought about, then it gets forgotten. And then when something happens, it's like, oh, we have to fix this now, it's very reactionary. And it seems like the tide is kind of turning where it's more proactive, which is really interesting to watch various organizations and theater companies go through that journey.
Only thanks to you. No, I'm serious. I really am serious. Art New York's collaborative efforts and outreach and providing space for these conversations, pushing these conversations, not being afraid to leap in and open up Pandora's box. I mean, and really, you guys have been here the whole time, pushing and pushing. And so, and offering and celebrating. And, I just have to say, thank you, because if we're not doing this work together, it won't work. I mean, we keep seeing this over and over. It can't be a silo effort.
Exactly. Can you talk about your work with deaf artists and some of the challenges that they face, or some of the wins that have happened? Because I've been seeing a lot of deaf artists on stage in a way that I hadn't been in the past, 2 years?
Yes.
Which is really interesting to see. But, how has your work with deaf artists been?
Oh, I mean, yes, we're seeing a sort of would it be a renaissance? Since maybe it's the first time. I don't
right,
know.
Exactly.
No, I mean, it's beautiful what we're seeing now. There is definitely a lot of media attention and stage attention to deaf artists, and both in front of and behind the scenes now. I think that's that's the shift. I think, for me, I think when I had a personal experience of realizing that 504 sit-in and the requirement of interpreter, the legal provision of interpreters, mandate for interpreters really hit home for me was when I interpreted for Millicent Simmons in Wonderstruck. She was 12 years old, a 12-year-old deaf actress.
Wow.
And I'm interpreting, and I go, this is why we do what we do. This is why we did this, and this is why we had the sit-ins. So you, a young, emerging actress, can go out and, change the world. And so, I think interpreting for the theater has a place here as well. It is also an opportunity for young deaf artists, children, to come and see art and, and give them the inspiration to become an artist. And when the interpreting team has dazzles, has deaf interpreters involved, that kind of representation there also is a strong model for young deaf children to go, oh, I can do this. I can be a part of the arts. And I think we have to look for ways wherever we are to open doors, to make those connections so that, the network just extends. It doesn't shrink, it extends.
Yeah, I love that. Like being able to, I know when I was a kid and seeing representation of people who were disabled and with any disability was so important. And now being an adult and seeing little kids have that representation and notice that the tide is turning. It is slow, but it is turning. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, we are making some improvement. The needle is moving. And I think that is so valuable as a child to be able to see yourself or, a piece of yourself being represented in the arts, that is so important. For anyone who is unfamiliar with hands-on, with interpretive theater, with your work, what would you think is one thing that they should know? And I know this is a very big question, but
I think hands-on is really an organization unlike any other. It's very community-bound. It's committed to the arts. Beth Prever has been running this organization for decades, pretty much on her own. I mean, along with Candace Brecker-Penn and a few other people. But, I mean, it's really been a commitment to the arts, the love of the arts, and including the deaf community at every step of the way. And I think with Art New York's support and hands-on support, which is always to have conversations with audiences, welcome audiences in, design places that will be barrier-free, as both attitudinally and architecturally. I think that those efforts, we're seeing a huge change. The audience is growing a lot for interpreted theater. Our interpreters are growing a lot. I mean, it's beautiful to see. It's a moment to celebrate. And yes, we can lose this moment. I don't want to just like la 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 la.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing the push. We're seeing the tide go back. I think it's what we can't get lost in is the narrative of despair, and what we can't get lost in is living a past narrative. That past can inform us, but it can't trap us.
Right.
So I think we need to celebrate, as we move forward and know that we got to fight with fierce love. It's got to be fierce warrior love. Can't be this sweet little love ya. I'll put an interpreter there for you. It's going to be
a little bit more aggressive.
A little bit more. Yeah. A little bit. Yeah.
Ashley. What a dynamic interview.
Yes, it was.
Wow. I mean, Working with Lynnette for the past year and the entire hands-on team from Beth Prever and Candace Broker-Penn, I was very fortunate to see firsthand, or I should say hands-on, they're incredible. I know, I'm so punny. Their incredible work with interpretive theater, especially, I sat in on one of their training workshop last October that Art New York hosted. But this interview was a really special treat, especially to hear the beginnings of such a profound human being. I was really moved simply by Lynnette's language. Like when she said, quote, "Origin stories are hard. Where do you start the origins?" End quote. Yes, Lynnette, give me that language. So what was your takeaway about hearing about her origins, about her beginnings?
That quote was so powerful, first of all. When it comes to origin stories, what I appreciated about hers was how it found her. She didn't go looking for it. Or to be more specific, it wasn't like it was something that she was actively going towards, and it didn't exactly fall into her lap. But I loved how she mentioned that, there wasn't a coincidence. Like it wasn't by accident, and I thought she just happened to be at the right place and at the right time, and all of the things were lined up for her to take part in this historical event. And it just reminded me, I think, how in life, when it comes to what your calling is or what your purpose is, sometimes it finds you, you don't find it. So I thought that was really cool.
I love that she used the word karmic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what that was.
Yeah, I love that. And I was like, wow, this thing, you got to be a part of this thing. And you were just going to, do something for your mom, I think. And I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. And she said yes. That's
she
the
said
thing,
yes. Yeah.
Is that when it finds you, you have the opportunity to say yes or no. And she said yes. And kept saying yes. And it led to more a fuller experience and meeting all these new people. And then it started to inform her work. And I thought that was really neat.
It threw her on the right life path that she was going to be, or she was going to be doing. So listeners, you're kind of getting a little behind the scenes information. So Lynnette followed up with us after that recording, and I'm going to read a little bit from the email she sent us. She writes, quote, "I did, of course, walk away with many things I wish I had said. One was about the importance of Black Lives Matter and We See You White American Theater and the push for change. That is one of the reasons we are seeing the demand for access services, visibility, and more awareness that representation matters in interpreting just as it does everywhere else. This accelerated push in the demand for BIPOC interpreters has shown the fissure and revealed the historic segregation of our communities. Interpreting has been a white hearing-dominated field, so we have a lot of work to do, reparative, restorative, and generative, as we move forward to rectify the past harmful practices. I just wanted to note that I think with all of the Black Lives Matter protests, many of the same community practices sprang up as they did when I was in San Francisco. Interpreters just showed up and were there to support the community. I just wanted to acknowledge those who are carrying on the practices today. It's still alive and well." That's Lynnette Taylor. And so reading her response now, I know she's so how she writes is just how she speaks, how she writes. It's just, Lynnette, we love you. So reading this response now, it really, for me, really shines light on something she said about her interview, about even within the goods of a civil rights movement, there is growth and radical change that is needed to fight systematic oppression, racism, even internally of these practices. And Lynnette really takes ownership and accountability by saying, it's on us, we need to do better. So I would love to hear, Ashley, what you think about this. What are the intersectionalities that need to be addressed when looking at anti-ableist work, disability equity work, looking at anti-racism and anti-oppression practices?
Yeah, I appreciated that Lynnette mentioned that with everything that's going on with our industry currently, that we're being shown a lot of progress. It's kind of at a snail's pace. I think oh my gosh, it's 2023 and we have not fixed this yet. Are you serious? But I think it's important to note that we can still acknowledge how far we've come and still be we still have far to go. And being that when it comes to being anti-ableist, anti-racist, and other anti-oppression issues, I think it's all of that is connected. And so you can't be one without being the other. You can't say, I'm anti-ableist and be racist. You can't be, you can't say I'm anti-racist and be ableist.
Yeah.
It's all connected. And if you're not looking at all of that and really holding yourself and these organizations and these institutions within the theater field accountable for those things, then it makes the work that still needs to be done harder.
Yeah. It's more than just intentions. You have to hold us accountable. You have to hold these systems accountable.
I think it's also one of those things where, in noting how much work we still have to do, that we don't necessarily want to roll the waters back.
Yeah.
You can still have acknowledgement of the work that needs to be done and be like, yeah, we still have further to do, but it's I think it's both. Multiple things can be true at once. And when you start getting into, well, we've come this far, like, why are we still talking about this? Progress has been made, and not pay attention to what's actively happening now. Or if you go in the reverse and be like, well, we still have work to do and this isn't changing, you're not acknowledging the work that has been done. Both can live at the same time.
Challenges and also celebrations.
Exactly.
And speaking of hierarchies, I just loved just the fun line about the 25-cent tent. And how, when you asked her about the elevator, and she said, well, those are for the VIPs. And so, like, even in something like...
I forgot about that. I was like, there was a hierarchy
There was a hierarchy system, just on where intimate moments happened, But I think what will stick with me for this entire interview you did with her was how at a young, impressionable age, Lynnette was. These life-altering experiences affected her work decades on, as you said earlier today. And how she is so community-driven and her work is so generative after having, just a lot of life lessons she learned in her time there. So reflecting on your interview, the final question, what are some moments that are going to stay with you? What's a moment of this interview that has haunted you?
Oh, there's so many, and I have to pick one. This one, actually, I was going to go with the elevator hierarchy system, but actually, this one just came to me. It was, at some point in the interview, she mentioned how she had felt bad about being an artist, that to do this work and try to do her art at the same time, it was like she stopped doing that for a while and felt guilty because this work was more important. And I think as artists, as administrators, whatever your role is in theater, once again, multiple things can be true at one time.
Yes.
And you can still do this work and be able to do the things that you are passionate about, that it doesn't have to be an either or. And I really connected with that because I felt that at moments in the beginning of my career as an artist, like, oh, there are all these things that I care about, especially as a person who identifies as disabled. How can I marry these two things? Because I'm going to get on my soapbox, but how is that going to interfere with my art? Like, am I going to be the one who is thought of as the contrarian because I'm always bringing up these things, these issues, these oppressions, these systems, these practices? Can I do both? And I found it really interesting that oh, wow, Lynnette's felt that too. So it's not...
We're not alone.
We're not alone. I'm like, I'm not the first person to feel this way, and I won't be the last person to feel this way.
Exactly.
I think that was a big thing that'll stay with me.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer.
Thank you.
I would love to highlight this incredible organization that we have mentioned a few times now that Lynnette is a big part of, and that is Hands On. And for folks who don't know Hands On as intimately as we do at Art New York, Hands-On's mission is to provide access to arts and cultural programs for the deaf and hard of hearing communities. Hands-On is one of the only organizations of its kind, offering signed interpreted performances for the non-for-profit theatrical arena, along with information on deafness and the arts across New York City and the country. It was founded in 1982 by the incredible Beth Prever. They began with 6 interpreted performances, but now average around 20 to 30 interpreted Broadway and off-Broadway productions a year. Wow, that's a big growth.
Yeah.
Since its inception, Hands-On has provided over 500 interpreted performances. And if you're interested in learning more about Hands-On, visit handson.org. That's handson.org. I would also love to share that Lynnette acknowledges the many women organizers of the 504 sit-in, including Mary Lou Breslin, Kitty Cohn, Judy Heumann, and Pat Wright, and that unfortunately there is only one surviving deaf member of the sit-in, Steve McKellen. And last but not least, we have an update to our story. This is exciting. Lynnette did go back to college, attending New York University Tisch School of the Arts, studying film. And she writes that it took decades to pay off her student loans. Ugh.
Oh, gosh.
Right. That just hurts my heart because, I will always be paying off my student loans. So we feel you, Lynnette. And congratulations for actually paying them off, even though it took decades.
Congratulations. That's huge.
Ashley, thank you so much for this lovely episode. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
I had a blast. Lynnette was great. And if you have the opportunity to see her interpret or hear her speak or hear her teach a training, you're in for a treat.
Yeah. Check them out. Mm-hmm. Check them out, folks. Well, listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have, remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcast and visit art-newyork.org to learn more about the many programs and offerings, including our very own What's Off podcast. Until next time.
What's Off is a production of Art New York. Executive producer, David E. Shane. Associate producer, Erica Ray Barnes. Line producers, Ashley J. Hicks and Nikki Maggio, with audio engineering by Catalan Media.